also be very heavy.
Bitte einmal sagen.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you in this beautiful location here in Berlin, and of course a very warm welcome to all of you joining us online. My name is Ali Aslan. I'm an international TV presenter, moderator and journalist, and as your host today, it is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you all on behalf of our two co-hosts, the German G7 presidency and the European Commission, to the International Expert Conference on the Recovery, Reconstruction and Modernization of Ukraine. Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine is causing immense human suffering and destruction of critical infrastructure. And it's apparent to everyone here in this room that a major global effort will be required to rebuild Ukraine once the war is over, but that the process and the planning for that has to start now. To that end, today's high-level conference will bring together world-renowned international experts from international organizations, national governments, think tanks, and academic institutions to discuss how to shape the international recovery efforts. The idea for today's event was actually initiated by the German G7 presidency back in June at the G7 summit in Elmau. And this conference clearly wants to underline and reiterate that the international community stands united in their support for Ukraine and its democratic future. Throughout the day, here on this very stage, and numerous panels and sessions will cover a wide range of topics, and I think we can all look forward to stimulating debates here on this stage. A debate, by the way, which you can all join by using the hashtag recovery of Ukraine. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's give the floor to our two co-hosts. First up, he is, of course, the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, a country that is currently holding the presidency of the G7. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Excellencies, honored guests and delegates, friends in and from Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen. President von der Leyen and I welcome you to Berlin to support our Ukrainian friends in realizing their vision for their future, for the recovery, reconstruction and modernization of Ukraine, for a peaceful, prosperous and resilient Ukraine with whom we share a joint European future. As we speak, Russia's vicious war of aggression is once again intensifying. The latest indiscriminate attacks, including the use of kamikaze drones against civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, mark a new low in Russian despicable effort to wipe Ukraine off the map. The abhorrent way of warfare only demonstrates one thing: Putin's Russia is desperate. The proud and brave nation of Ukraine will prevail. To ensure that it does prevail, together with all our friends and partners, we will resolutely continue to support Ukraine, politically, financially, in terms of humanitarian assistance and also with arms, for as long as it takes, for as long as that support is needed. In particular, Germany will continue to provide Ukraine with the air defense systems it so urgently needs now. The best reconstruction is the reconstruction that does not have to happen at all, because Ukrainian cities and power stations are protected from Russian bombs, drones and missiles. Today, we do not yet know when this war will end, but end it will. And when it does, we will continue to stand by Ukraine in its struggle for security, freedom and democracy. We know that no two countries' history are the same. But from our own historical experience, we also know that reconstruction is always possible and that it is never too soon to tackle this task. Now is the moment to convene the brightest and best minds to provide expertise and recommendations to start rebuilding Ukraine. Now is the moment to use the world's collective knowledge to contribute to Ukraine's future. Now is the moment to develop the institutional framework to govern and deliver Ukraine's reconstruction. And now is the moment to discuss how Ukraine's future can be built and financed. That is why we gather here today, to discuss how to ensure and how to sustain the financing of the recovery, reconstruction and modernization of Ukraine for years and decades to come. So let me stress what this conference is not. It is not a regular donor conference. It is more fundamental than that. This conference is about developing the structures and the mechanisms that will help to facilitate and finance what John Maynard Keynes in 1944 called permanent reconstruction. So that's what is at stake here, nothing less than creating a new Marshall Plan for the 21st century, a generational task that must begin now. The recovery, reconstruction and modernization of Ukraine will indeed be a challenge for generations, one that will require the combined strength of the entire international community. But it is also an opportunity for generations to come if we get it right. So let us not just focus on reconstructing what was, as important as this is at present. But let us also think about what can be a more advanced, sustainable and resilient Ukraine. A Ukraine that will be an important producer of green energy, an exporter of high-end industrial and agricultural products, a digital powerhouse with some of the world's best IT experts, an EU member with infrastructure and a legal framework to match. For me, the European Union's commitment to Ukraine as a future member is one of the most consequential geopolitical decisions of our times. Our global endeavour to both reconstruct Ukraine and pursue the EU accession process will yield enormous synergies. Not just Ukraine, but Europe as a whole will be the stronger for it. We also need to combine the various international strengths in support of Ukraine. During our presidency, the G7 has taken unprecedented steps to impose economic costs on Russia and on those supporting its war of aggression. Based on the commitments we made for Ukraine at the Elmhurst Summit in June, we are now looking to our Japanese friends as the incoming G7 presidency to ensure the continuity of our support. G20 leaders will meet in Bali next month, and we encourage our Indonesian friends to address Ukraine's needs as well as the imperative to defend the international rules-based order. The international community established a vision for Ukraine's future in Lugano last July. I congratulate our Swiss and British friends on the progress made and look forward to the follow-up event next year. Last but not least, we come together here in Berlin today as a global community ready to pool our knowledge and convene the expertise needed to transform Ukraine. In its fight for freedom, independence and sovereignty, Ukraine is not alone, nor will it be alone. Yet, at this turning point in Ukrainian history, Ukrainian ownership and agency are key. Therefore, I welcome President Zelensky's keynote speech and Prime Minister Smygal's participation today. Together, we are looking forward to the insights that the participating experts bring to the table. We want to gather pathways for financing Ukraine's future, not just for months, but for years to come. In order to be able to live up to this gigantic endeavour, we need to develop even better ways to bring together public and private funders from around the world to invest into a sustainable future of Ukraine. We should discuss what a transparent, effective and inclusive governance framework could look like, one that all our partners and the international institutions present here today can subscribe to. And we will hear from the very best on aspects such as decentralization and regional development, on anti-corruption, investment promotion and macroprudential practices. The better the setup we create for Ukraine's reconstruction now, the more international support Ukraine will enjoy in the years to come. In convening this excellent and diverse international group, we demonstrate once again our unwavering support for Ukraine and our full confidence that the values we all share with Ukraine will prevail. Thank you all for joining us, for thinking big and outside the box, just at the scale of the task ahead requires. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much to the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, for your opening remarks, for your leadership, and for initiating this conference that we're all here together today. I saw that Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal was listening very carefully to your words. Warm welcome to you as well, Prime Minister. We will see you later back here on stage, of course. But this conference has two co-hosts, the German G7 presidency as well as the European Commission, and therefore it is my great pleasure now to welcome on stage the President of the European Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ursula von der Leyen.
Herr Bundeskanzler, Herr Bundespräsident Cassis, Prime Minister Shmyhal, dear Denis, Prime Minister Morawiecki, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished friends of Ukraine. We want to discuss the reconstruction of Ukraine today. Thousands of destroyed houses, several hundred schools turned to rubble, countless bridges, roads, power stations, railway infrastructure, and industry bombed. For Ukrainians, these are not just statistics. This is their everyday experience. It's about having a roof over their heads, a warm place in the winter, and classroom where their children are safe. It's about going to work, bringing food home, and making a living. These are hard, scary, and painful days for Ukrainians. But Ukrainians are showing us that they have hope and confidence in the future, and they will keep fighting for it. And it is their future that brings us here today. Europe has been supporting Ukraine from day one on. We can never match the sacrifices Ukrainians are making every day, but we can stand by their side. We have introduced the toughest sanctions against Russia. Overall, the European Union member states and European financial institutions have provided Ukraine with more than 19 billion euros in assistance, and this is without military assistance. We are working hard to increase Ukraine's access to our single market because this creates revenues for Ukraine. And what is more, Europeans have opened their hearts and their homes to more than 8 million Ukrainians who have fled Putin's bombs, and 4 million who ask for temporary protection in our member states. And I would like to thank the millions of citizens who are giving the most noble help to their neighbors in need. This is Europe at its best. Today we want to discuss how to step up our ongoing support for Ukrainians and how to make the reconstruction of their beautiful country a resounding success. For me, 3 points are key. First, we need to make sure that Ukraine at all times gets the support it needs, from relief to rehabilitation to long-term reconstruction. Second, we need the right architecture in place to make support as broad and as inclusive as possible. And third, as Ukraine has achieved candidate status to access the European Union, we need to firmly embed Ukraine's reconstruction efforts as part of its path towards the European Union. So let us have a look at the first point, and that is Ukraine needs relief, fast rehabilitation and reconstruction. Relief for the daily survival, to be able to pay the bare minimum every single day. Salaries for military and security forces, salaries for teachers and doctors in the hospitals and in the countryside, pensions for the pensioners, and other indispensable payments. According to the international financial institutions and Ukraine, there's a need of 3 to 5 billion euros a month just to cover these recurrent running costs. Here, reliable support is needed from the European Union, from our friends in the United States, and of course from the international financial institutions. I believe it's only right if the European Union assumes its fair share. And I'm working with our member states that the Union could support Ukraine with up to 1.5 billion euros every month of the war, which would be in sum round about 18 billion euros in 2023. In parallel, Ukraine needs fast rehabilitation right now as we speak, especially as Russia is deliberately leading targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure with a very clear aim to cut off men, women and children of water, electricity and heating as the winter is approaching. These are pure acts of terror, and Russia tries to paralyze Ukraine. But we will not let this happen. And in addition, we know that there are around 11 million internally displaced people in Ukraine, and they need shelter, heating, water, and electricity. Their children need to go to school, and therefore we need to repair houses, schools, and infrastructure already right now. As European Commission, we have announced to support this rehabilitation of damaged Ukrainian schools or the repair of electricity infrastructure, and through the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, we have provided tents and over 600,000 items for shelter, but we all know more has to be done. This phase of fast rehabilitation is essential to ensure that life can continue in Ukraine. And this brings me to our overall important topic of today, and that is the reconstruction effort. At the Lugano Reconstruction Conference, representatives from more than 40 countries and international organizations agreed on the so-called Lugano principles. Ukraine-owned, reform-focused, transparency, accountability and rule of law, democratic participation, gender equality and inclusion, and sustainability. I think these are very good principles, but now we have to fill them with life. And for doing that, we need the best and the brightest on reconstruction. That's why we have invited you. Now it is time to bring the platform to action, together with the international donors, international business, and of course civil society. We have no time to waste. The scale of destruction is staggering. The World Bank puts the costs of the damage at 350 billion euros. This is for sure more than one country or one union can provide alone. We need all hands on deck. The G7, the European Union, Europe, strong partners like the United States, Canada, Japan, the UK, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many, many more. And of course, we need the expertise of our partners from the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, to the World Bank and the IMF. So we will discuss today how to involve these sectors and actors, how to map investment needs, how to coordinate action, and of course, how to channel the resources in a reliable and accountable way. The coordination platform that the international community has been discussing in the past month needs to take off ground as soon as possible, preferable before the end of the year or early at the beginning of next year. We stand ready to offer the European Commission to provide the secretariat to the platform. We want the work to start and to be done. And that leads me to my final point. Ukraine will be in the lead. I think this is paramount. Because our action will be driven by the aspirations and the desires of the Ukrainian people. And Ukraine has a very clear vision and decided to become a member of the European Union. Ukraine has achieved candidate status. And with the ongoing relief and rehabilitation, Ukraine will combine investment and reforms with the aim to become a vibrant part of Europe's sustainable and digital future, with the law and institutions in place to uphold the rule of law, to fight corruption, and to have good governance standards of all partner countries and our European Union. Because the road to reconstruction is at the same time Ukraine's path towards its vision. It is a strong anchor to become a modern and prosperous country. And ladies and gentlemen, for all this, we need you. We need you and your expertise, your insights that are key for us to succeed. This is why I'm especially looking forward to this conference today. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for being here with us. Every euro, every dollar, every pound, every yen we spend is an investment in Ukraine, but it is also an investment in the democratic values around the globe. And all this is urgently needed. But it is also a statement if we are successful with that. It is a statement that the free and democratic nations of this world stand together and that we stand up for our values. And the courageous Ukrainian men and women are fighting for their independence, but they are also fighting for the international rules-based orders, and we will stand by their side as long as it takes. Slava Ukraini, long live Europe.
Welcome back to Berlin, and thank you very much for your remarks, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. You said very pointedly that Ukraine is in the lead here. This conference is, of course, co-hosted by Germany and the European Commission, but Ukraine is in the lead. This conference, this whole process is being coordinated very closely with the Ukrainian government. It goes without saying, and therefore I'm extremely delighted that we're joined live from Kiev by a gentleman who in many ways has become the embodiment, who personifies the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people, of his people, and he's joining us live now from Kiev. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. Mr. President, hello from Berlin to Kiev. It's wonderful to have you with us. I hope you can hear us well. We're very much looking forward to your remarks.
Yes, I can hear. Доброго дня, дорогі друзі. Вітаю вас від імені українського народу. І дякую за цю конференцію, яка наближає повернення нашій країні нормального життя. Я зараз чув виступ пана канцлера. І також почув шановну пані Урсулу фон дер Ляєн. І, знаєте, потім я подивився свою промову і зрозумів, що, в принципі, ми могли би помінятися промовами і нічого не змінити. І це дуже непогано. Це говорить, що ми приблизно однаково бачимо майбутнє Європи, безпеки, світу, майбутнє України. Але я хотів би зупинитись на деяких пріоритетах. Але передусім хочу відзначити ваші, пане канцлере, ваші слова, які прозвучали ще вчора. Ви сказали, що той, хто інвестує у відновлення України, інвестує у майбутнього члена Європейського Союзу. Це дуже важливі слова. Власні і вагомі. Я вірю, що їх почують усі європейці та глобальні економічні гравці. Ваші слова повністю відображають сенс і цієї нашої конференції, і всієї співпраці України та Європейського Союзу, нашої та ваших країн. Ми стаємо одним цілим, і це незворот. Єдина, міцна, вільна і заснована на цінностях Європи. Це можливо тільки з України. Я хочу одразу подякувати вам, пані президентка Європейської комісії, за щиру і послідовну підтримку нашої держави. Знаю, що ви, пані Урсула, поділяєте цю думку пана канцлера щодо майбутнього членства України, і я впевнений, що разом з вами і усіма нашими друзями в Євросоюзі ми вже зовсім скоро реалізуємо бачення більшості європейців, впевненої більшості в усіх країнах ЄС, бачення України як ЄС. Зараз ми вийшли на той рівень у відносинах, якого Україна давно заслуговує. Значення і масштаб нашої країни усвідомлюються. Люди знають, що ми можемо дати нашому спільному європейському дому. Люди бачать, що ми вже даємо. І усі ви, учасники і учасниці конференції, добре знаєте, що ми можемо дати. Україна – це фізична безпека Європи від будь-якого нового удару російської тиранії. Саме Україна здатна гарантувати і буде гарантувати, що російський реваншизм не зламає наш європейський дім. Україна – це енергетична безпека Європи, і не тільки наших сусідів. Коли ми звільнемо всю нашу територію від російських загарбників, Європейський Союз зможе з нашою допомогою заміщувати брудні російські енергоресурси. А наш експорт електрики, потенційно це десятки гігават, буде однією з фундаментальних опор європейської кліматичної політики. Україна вже гарант продовольчої безпеки світу. А отже, ми гарантуємо і передбачуваність міграційних потоків на території Євросоюзу. Чим результативніше працює наше аграрне виробництво і чим вагоміше наш експорт продовольства, тим спокійніше соціальна ситуація у всіх тих регіонах планети, звідки можливі хвилі мігрантів в Європу. І ще одне – це промислова активність, наша виробнича культура, наші природні ресурси, географічне розташування, суспільні традиції дозволяють завдяки поєднанню українського і загальноєвропейського потенціалів дати новий імпульс економічному життю усього ЄС. Це економічне зростання і робочі місця для українців і для всіх європейців. Ви знаєте все це на 100%. І знаєте, що саме тому Росії так потрібен контроль над Україною. Це не просто якась там політична амбіція. Це дуже чіткі безпекові, енергетичні, продовольчі, промислові розрахунки. Розрахунки, які для Росії не справдяться ніколи. Український народ захистить свою державу, свою свободу. І загарбники вже це усвідомлюють. Це одна з причин їхньої звірячої жорстокості, один з мотивів їхнього терору – знищити те, що не буде працювати на них, а може посилити усіх нас, українців, європейців. Як результат такого російського терору сотні тисяч об'єктів зруйновано. Порт чи вокзал, школа чи лікарня, житловий будинок чи станція техобслуговування машин, завод чи пекарня, елеватор з пшеницею чи електростанція. Росія знищує все це. Знищує, щоб нам було важче проходити цю зиму, щоб українці якнайдовше не могли оправитись після цієї війни, щоб ви якнайдовше не змогли інтегрувати український економічний потенціал і загальноєвропейський потенціал. Ракетами та іранськими ударними дронами зруйновано більше третини однієї лише енергетичної галузі. І це перед зимою. Ми всі разом маємо цьому протистояти. Саме таку місію цієї конференції я бачу. Я прошу вас розглядати все це з точки зору безпеки. 4 її елементів. Нам потрібна безпека на землі. Ми працюємо заради неї разом, налагоджуючи оборонну співпрацю. Нам потрібна безпека у небі. І працюємо заради неї, домовляючись про постачання систем протиповітряної оборони. Нам потрібна фінансова безпека. І ми працюємо заради неї на багатьох рівнях. МВФ, Світовий банк, Європейський Союз, Сполучені Штати і інші партнери. І 4-й рівень – це наша інституційна спроможність. Те, як ми реалізуємо всі наші програми посилення і програми відбудови вже зараз. Зараз, коли війна ще триває і розрахована на післявоєнний рівень. І я прошу вас зараз зосередитись не тільки на 4-му елементі, на тому як, але пам'ятати про 3-й елемент, про те, що потрібно наповнити реальним фінансуванням нашу роботу заради відновлення України. Я дякую вам і Європейському Союзі в цілому, і кожній країні ЄС, зокрема, яка допомагає за вже надану підтримку нашій державі. Однак маємо надати більш системний характер цій підтримці. Я вірю, що вже зараз можемо ухвалити рішення про заснування фінансового Рамштайну для підтримки нашої спільної стабільності за аналогією з оборонним Рамштайном, який вже функціонує. Нам потрібна фінансова координаційна платформа, яка об'єднає і направить усі зусилля, що спрямовані на відбудову нашої країни після бойових дій. Потрібна консолідація, чітке спрямування ресурсів своєчасно. Саме так має продовжуватись те, про що ми говорили в Лугану з президентом Касісом на першій конференції щодо нашого відновлення. Ми розробили прозорий план першочергових кроків у відбудові. Це те, що необхідно Україні буквально для виживання. Не завтра, не наступного року, не на конференції в Британії. Саме зараз. Вага нашого Fast Recovery плану – 17 мільярдів доларів для критичної відбудови негайної. Це лікарні, це школи, життєво важлива транспортна і енергетична інфраструктура. Ми маємо колосальну потребу у відбудові житла, там, де російські танки і артилерія методично знищували міста. Київщина, Чернігівщина, Сумщина, Харківщина. Вже зараз потрібно дати людям новий фундамент для життя. Але чи можемо ми його дати? Ми поки не отримали жодного цента на реалізацію Fast Recovery. Я прошу вас наблизити необхідні рішення, щоб зробити процес залучення партнерів до нашої відбудови швидшим. Я ініціював створення фонду відновлення України як ключової інституції. Важливо, що наглядова рада фонду на 75% буде складатись з представників країн-донорів. Це прозорість, але це і відповідальність. Фонд має запрацювати вже наступного місяця. Так само зараз, вже на цій конференції, варто ухвалити рішення щодо допомоги з покриттям дефіциту нашого державного бюджету наступного року. Для України це непідйомна сума – 38 мільярдів доларів дефіциту. Це зарплати вчителів, лікарів, соціальні виплати, пенсії, суттєві кошти. Але наше об'єднання достатньо потужне, щоб реалізувати і таке завдання. Цей потенціал є, зокрема, завдяки Міжнародному валютному фонду та іншим фінансовим інституціям. Наш діалог триває, і я вірю, що він розвиватиметься від абстрактних цифр до конкретики, конкретного обсягу фінансів з конкретними джерелами. Про це сьогодні також має йтися. І більше, що український потенціал такий, що ми можемо дати у відповідь на порядок більше. Ось за що воює Росія. Ось що означає відбудова для України. Ось що означає перемога для України. І ось що означає мир в Україні. Україна – це гарантії безпеки. Україна – це наш спільний розвиток. Україна – це вдячність. Коли наші дії відповідають нашим цінностям, а наші підходи скоординовані, ми досягаємо результатів, які неможливо було уявити ще нещодавно. Ми маємо такі результати на полі бою, ми маємо такі результати в економічній і соціальній адаптації до умов війни, ми маємо такі результати у нашій інтеграції з інституціями Європейського Союзу, і ми можемо їх досягнути у забезпеченні стійкості України і відбудові України вже зараз. Хай агресор бачить, що його мета недосяжна, а наші з вами спільні цілі всі реалізуються. І обов'язково маємо визначитись з конкреткою того, як працюватиме механізм відшкодування державою-агресором усіх спричинених цією війною збитків. Російські активи, ті, які вже заморожені, і ті, які ще необхідно заморозити, дуже серйозні. Значна частина цих активів в юрисдикціях саме європейських країн. Нам потрібна компенсація, і це справедливо. А отже, нам потрібен реальний, швидкий, законний механізм направлення російських активів на відшкодування збитків, завданих російською ж війною. Я прошу вас сьогодні і цьому приділити час. Я дякую вам за увагу, дякую за підтримку. Слава Україні!
Thank you very much, President Zelensky, for your words. The goal is to move from abstract numbers to concrete goals. Your leadership style is admired all around the world. We wish you nothing but the best. May this war end very soon. Thank you so much for joining us live from Kiev. Once again, this is your applause. Thank you so much. And this concludes the opening remarks for this very important conference. Now we move to the opening plenary titled International Perspectives on Ukraine's Recovery, Reconstruction and Modernization. The most recent UN vote has clearly demonstrated that the predominant majority of the international community stands with Ukraine. So in our opening plenary, we therefore want to zoom in on the international perspectives on Ukraine's recovery, reconstruction and modernization. First up, as a speaker, he is, of course, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and we welcome him to Berlin. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal is here, ladies and gentlemen. President, it's good to have you with us. He is the President of the Swiss Confederation. Welcome to Berlin. Ignacio Cassis is here, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Mr. President. It's good to have you with us. A country that is playing a pivotal role in this conflict, first and foremost, by lending support and taking in a large number of Ukrainian refugees. He's the Prime Minister of Poland, and we're delighted he's here. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki is here, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to have you, Prime Minister. Welcome to Berlin. And, of course, international organizations play a key role in ensuring that these efforts are taking the right path on the recovery, reconstruction, and modernization angle. Therefore, it's my great pleasure to welcome now on stage the Secretary General of the OECD, Matthias Cormann, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you. And this first session will be moderated by the President of the German Marshall Fund, formerly a U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Heather Conley. And with that, Heather, great to have you with us. And with that, happy to hand over to you. It's great to have you. After the welcoming round, of course. Heather, great to have you with us.
Dear guests, Chancellor Scholz, President von der Leyen, Excellencies, thank you, Ali, very much. Policymakers from Warsaw to Ottawa, Washington to Madrid, Brussels, London, and Berlin, just to name a few, have all wanted the same policy outcome. We want Ukraine to win. But what does winning... Yes. Thank you. But what does winning mean? For me, winning means Ukraine wins the largest land war in Europe since the Second World War and restore its sovereignty and territorial integrity, first to its pre-February 24th borders and then to its 1991 internationally recognized borders through the provision of military assistance. For me, winning means ensuring that Ukraine has sufficient macroeconomic support to fund its military forces, pay salaries, and survive economically as the Russian military cripples civilian infrastructure and limits the export of grain shipments. And most importantly, winning means the modernization and full recovery of Ukraine. And we must understand that the cost of winning this future is so much less than the cost of failure. Winning is not simply Ukraine's circumference and the international community and the private sector to stop thinking, planning, and rebuilding Ukraine. Don't let the naysayers say we can't. During the darkest days of the Second World War, allies were planning and building the post-war environment. They stayed focused on winning and planning a more peaceful and secure world. We must build that vision in the 21st century. And if the Marshall Plan taught us anything, is that the West builds and rebuilds if necessary, because democracies build because we must deliver hope for our citizens that there will be a better tomorrow. And of course, this means we need a modern Marshall Plan for Ukraine. This, of course, is music to my ears as president of the German Marshall Fund, an organization born out of gratitude by the German government and people to the American people for the transformative effect of the Marshall Plan. I wonder, Mr. Prime Minister, if 25 years from now we will have a Ukrainian Marshall Fund of Europe. That is a hope I hope to see someday. Thank you. Thank you. This is indeed the task of our generation. And the Marshall Plan gives us a hopeful roadmap. We know from the original Marshall Plan that Ukraine must lead its own recovery. Our challenge today, just as it was in 1947, is that there needs to be a continuum from the emergency needs to long-term recovery. One cannot exist without the other. We know today's donor conference must address both elements, and all Western assistance must be rooted in Ukraine's integration into Euro-Atlantic institutions. We know Ukrainian civil society and cities, as well as the principles of transparency and accountability, also must be deeply rooted in Ukraine's reconstruction. We know we need a highly effective international coordination mechanism, something I hope we can agree to today. And we know we need a mechanism that will put Russian assets to work to rebuild Ukraine. And most importantly, we know that a Marshall Plan for Ukraine, just as the original plan was in 1947, will deliver hope for as long as it takes. And with that in mind, and with that framing, let's turn the podium over to the colleague who will lead this recovery. Please join me with your applause in welcoming Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal of Ukraine to the podium. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Dear Mr. Federal Chancellor, dear Olaf, dear Madam President of European Commission, dear Ursula, dear friends, colleagues, excellencies, distinguished guests of this conference, ladies and gentlemen. This is Oksana, and in October 10th she took her son to kindergarten and went to work at the hospital. Oksana saved children from oncology. A Russian missile killed Oksana in the
insights that are architecture in place in a accountable way.
From Kiev by a gentleman.
Учасники.
Calculate everything correctly, but it is no less important to start restoring everything that the aggressor destroyed today. We are doing everything we can. More than 60% of our budget goes to defense, 16% to social programs, 13% to medicine and education. At the same time, we were able to allocate almost 125 million euro for a rapid recovery. This will be enough for only 5% of damaged objects. That's why we need your help. I know that in some circles the idea is wondering, first end the war and then we will talk about recovery. You may ask why we need to restore heating plants if tomorrow they can be destroyed again. Because people should live, not freeze. You may ask why we need to rebuild damaged enterprises if a missile can fly there again. Because people have to work. You may ask why we need to restore bridges, roads and hospitals. And today, Madam President of European Commission answered this question because people need a place where to treat and cars with humanitarian aid, with your humanitarian aid, reach to those who are in need. Recovery right now and the development of recovery plan are not contradictory but complementary. We have to work in both these directions. In Lugano, we approved the principles on which Ukrainian recovery should be based, and we do our homework. For example, Ukraine will lead the recovery process and implement it together with all international partners. Our Joint Reforms Delivery Office has collected comments and proposals for the draft recovery plan from representatives of 14 countries, UN agencies, the representations of the European Union in Ukraine, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the World Bank Group, the European Investment Bank, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, a number of international organizations and institutions. The Organizations for Economic Cooperation and Development carried out through examination of the draft recovery plan. Our government received more than 300 proposals from 163 representatives of business and NGOs in Ukraine. They have been worked out by working groups and appropriate changes have been made to the sections of the plan, and still it's flexible to any changes. We fulfill our obligations. Another example, Ukraine will continue rapid reforms. Since June of this year, we have been a candidate for EU membership. Since October, an OECD prospective member country. This membership perspective is a powerful, intensive for reforms we are transforming every day. We continue to implement the association agreement. By the end of 2022, we plan to adopt about 100 EU standards for various industries. Business deregulation, privatization, systemic customs reform, government reform, increasing the targeting of assistance to citizens and businesses, liberalization of the labor code, digitalization and expansion of electronic services. All these things happen against the backdrop of war. Despite all this, we fulfill our obligations. Let's go further. Transparency and accountability. In Lugano, all of us said that hundreds of billions of the US dollars are needed to restore Ukraine. Some said that these are unrealistic amount. Therefore, the government of Ukraine, together with the team of the World Bank and the European Commission, presented a report on the damage caused by the war. As of June of this year, the verified needs for recovery already amount to $350 billion US dollars. The World Bank reports is transparent and accessible to everyone. Ukraine has already adopted the necessary legislation for the creation of the fund for liquidation of the consequences of Russia's aggression within the framework of the state budget of Ukraine. And today, President of Ukraine announced creation of state fund for recovery of our country. All donors know and see the direction of distribution of the donated funds. Each of their directions is a separate agreement. It is signed by members of the government of Ukraine, funding directions and clearly indicated there. We fulfill our obligations. There are many such examples. I think that within the framework of this conference, you will hear in more detail about all of our developments. We do our job. We adhere to all to all principles. But it is time to move on and to implementation of the plan. According to their DNA report verified by the World Bank, we need 17 billion for rapid recovery. President of Ukraine mentioned today this amount. This estimate does not take into account the losses from the updated tactics of the Russians, which goal is to create a humanitarian catastrophe by destroying the infrastructure for the supply of electricity, drinking water and heat on the eve of winter. The genocide of Ukrainians and the migration tsunami in the EU are Russia's new plans. One of the Lugano principles is united in defense, united in recovery. Thus, our task is to quickly and effectively respond to new challenges as quickly as and effectively we respond to military threats within the framework of the Rammstein Group. That is why the government of Ukraine wants to invite all partners to start financial coordination platform and meetings under the co-chairmanship of the USA, the European Union and Ukraine. We have to regularly hold meetings on the ministers of finance level of J7 countries and other partners leaders of the international financial organizations, including World Bank, IMF, EBRD, EIB and OECD. The purpose of these meetings is to coordinate financial assistance to Ukraine, determine directions for priority and long-term recovery, as well as sources of their financing. We need to coordinate funding approaches and consider military risk insurance options. And in the end, to find a solution how to most effectively confiscate or use the frozen Russian assets for the recovery of Ukraine. In addition, these meetings will provide an opportunity to develop policies and principles that will become universal mechanisms for the recovery of any country that suffered aggression and will form a plan for strengthening of the EU around the recovery plan of Ukraine. Finally, I would like to thank Germany and Chancellor Scholz for organizing this event and for the unchanging and principled position of solidarity with Ukraine. Thanks to the President of the European Commission, Madam Ursula von der Leyen, and for her President initiatives and very stable support which you provide for my country, from finances and weapons to already 8 packages of sanctions which help us to win this war. Our gratitude to the OECD Secretary General, Mr. Corman, for all his efforts in favor of Ukraine. I would also like to express special thanks to our friends from Poland, from Switzerland, from USA, from Eastern Europe and Baltic countries, who have provided us with an unprecedented level of assistance over 8 months. Thank you so much for this. We are grateful to all of the countries and organizations that are now back to back with us in our struggle for our freedom and independence. We believe that our victory will be the beginning of a renewed and stronger Europe as well as a better world. Thank you for supporting Ukraine. Slava Ukraini! Thank you so much.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for those comments. I welcome President Cassis to the podium. The Lugano conference in July set the tone and the pace for this conversation and the London conference next year. So, Mr. President, we welcome your comments. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here with you in Berlin in a safe and warm place. I would first like to thank the G7 presidency and the European Commission for organizing this conference. Many thanks also to you personally, Commission President von der Leyen, for your commitment, which has not diminished since Lugano. And thank you to you, Chancellor Scholz, for your commitment to the Ukraine recovery process and for the warm welcome this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I was in Kiev last week, where I met many very brave people. We all owe them our deepest respect. For months, you have been working day and night to defend themselves against Russia's aggression and to regain the territorial integrity of their country. I am speaking of President Volodymyr Zelensky, of Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, whom I greet warmly today, their teams, local authorities, civil society representatives, and all Ukrainians whose lives are getting tougher by the day. I was extremely impressed and moved by the resolve and strength of the people despite the man-made humanitarian disaster that is unfolding here in Europe before our very eyes in the 21st century and with winter fast approaching. During my visit to Kiev last week, three things struck me. First of all, hope. Beyond the urgent need for humanitarian assistance to get through the winter, the Ukrainian people also need medium and long-term perspectives. Even if we are unfortunately unable to predict when the war will end, it would be unforgivable not to move forwards resolutely with the political process of reconstruction. The people of Ukraine, just like the many refugees from Ukraine, deserve a perspective that offers hope. Secondly, clarity. My discussions in Ukraine show that many aspects of the recovery process still need to be clarified. What form will international coordination take? What governance structure will drive the process? What funding sources are available and which financial mechanism do we have at hand? To mention just a few. Many of these pending issues require quick, precise and firm answers if our ambition is to put in place an unprecedented international reconstruction program, a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. The European Union is, of course, well placed to play a prominent role in view of Ukraine's aspiration to join. But all parties are called upon to join forces for an effective recovery process. Perhaps even the European political community, which met the first time in Prague on the 6th of October, can also play a supportive role. I met with Moldova President Maya Sandu last Friday and assured her our support in organizing an event that could very well be dedicated to exploring this issue. But of course, I'm also thinking of extra-European states and multilateral organizations. Third element, trust. Trust is a central element of the process. Trust between Ukraine and its international partners, but also trust between Ukrainian citizens and their authorities. In the summer, Ukraine and Switzerland brought together all actors for an initial gathering in Lugano. This was the first step towards a structured recovery process. The cornerstones of this political process were set out in the Lugano Declaration. The 7 Lugano principles, which you can see on the screen behind me, are intended to assist and guide our efforts. As a doctor, I believe that actions need to be evidence-based. It is crucial that the process of reconstruction be based on a structured approach inspired by the lessons of the past and backed up by solid data. In view of the country's size and precisely because the needs are so immense, setting the right priorities is key. So beyond the urgent and indispensable need for humanitarian assistance, there needs to be a proper needs assessment. As stated in the Lugano Declaration, Ukraine and its people have the lead. This requires a domestic clarification of the roles and responsibilities of state bodies, such as the parliament, regional and local authorities, and Ukraine's vibrant civil society. Last Thursday in Kiev, I was able to meet a group of motivated and skilled young people. They represented different organizations, including this year's Nobel Peace Prize winners, the Center for Civil Liberties. I was impressed by how committed they are to their country and how and strengths of the people. This requires a domestic clarification of the roles and responsibilities of state bodies, such as the parliament, regional and local authorities, and Ukraine's vibrant civil society. Last Thursday in Kiev, I was able to meet a group of motivated and skilled young people. They represented different organizations, including this year's Nobel Peace Prize winners, the Center for Civil Liberties. I was impressed by how committed they are to their country and how and responsibilities of state bodies, such as the parliament, regional and local authorities, and Ukraine's vibrant civil society. Last Thursday in Kiev, I was able to meet a group of motivated and skilled young people. They represented different organizations, including this year's Nobel Peace Prize winners, the Center for Civil Liberties. I was impressed by how committed they are to their country and how to the violent violation of international law and to those values we defend, such as freedom and the right of people to live under a peaceful and just international order. My country stands firmly on the side of international law and recognizes the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of Ukraine. I expect today's conference to make a concrete contribution to defining a successful reconstruction process. For this, we need to draw on solid evidence and lessons from the past. I am confident that today's discussion will be fruitful. Let's get to work. Switzerland has rolled up its sleeves and is firmly on board. You can count on us. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you so much for underscoring the power of hope, the importance of trust, and the need for Ukraine to lead its recovery. Speaking of leadership, I am delighted to welcome that Poland has provided not only in security, but also in humanitarian support to the many who are
one persona very well known in Germany and German history, General Clausewitz, once said that the war is a continuation other means are also very, very important. And the war in Ukraine, the battlefield, the cruelties which were shown to us yet again by Dennis a minute ago, but also other fields which we sometimes forget about, like cyberspace, like Russian propaganda and fake news, or on the field of economy. Putin tailors his battle tactics to the opponent in question. He could not conquer Europe militarily if he didn't first defeat it economically. So today, Ukraine is fighting for its independence and the protection of our borders and our security as well. But the real struggle for European sovereignty is also taking place elsewhere on this economic and natural resources related battlefield. We often talk about Europe's dependence on Russian raw materials, and indeed Russia has behaved like a drug dealer who gives his first dose for free because he knows that the addict will come later on and will pay very dearly for next doses. Today, it is not enough to talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine and reconstruction of Europe. It's more than that. We have to talk about reshaping of Europe and European policies like energy policy and climate policy as well. I remember in the early 90s, Bill Clinton once said, "It's the economy, stupid." It was the time when we all believed that money will solve all the issues and it's enough to focus exclusively on economy. Now the struggle in Ukraine, the battle for freedom in Ukraine has awakened all of us to the other perspective, geopolitical perspective. The situation in Ukraine has awakened all of us from this geopolitical slumber. In a perfect market, the cheapest solutions are usually chosen, but perfect markets are usually only in outdated economic textbooks. In real markets, the cheapest solution often comes with hidden price, and cooperation between Europe and Russia seemed cheap and effective until Putin built it accordingly. It was supposed to be only gas contracts, but it turned out that Europe signed a pact for its very soul. From a Russian point of view, Vladimir Putin made a mistake, in my opinion, when he attacked Ukraine. From the Russian point of view, I emphasize this, because I'm sure he would have won the war against Europe, or he could have had higher chances to win the war against Europe, had he first continued to make it more dependent, to make Europe more dependent. The heroic struggle of the Ukrainian people has not only saved Ukraine itself, but it has also awakened many countries from our geopolitical slumber, or from their geopolitical slumber. For at least two reasons, Ukraine should be supported militarily and financially. And please bear in mind also this second component. I speak about this very, very often with Dennis and with President Zelensky. Financial support, indeed, as President von der Leyen emphasized, is critically important, not only for the next couple of months, but also for the entire 2023, to show that we are determined enough to support Ukraine. Therefore, I'm going to thank Ursula, but also Kristalina, who is with us, and Werner and the other institutions, so EIB, International Monetary Fund, and other international institutions who are aware of this, that we have to collectively gather 3 to 5 billion euros per month to give hope for Ukraine that they are not going to be left alone. Secondly, the struggle, the fight in Ukraine is important because supporting Ukraine is the best guarantee for our own security and for securing peace for decades to come. Anyone who does not support Ukraine today has either betrayed our values of our civilization, or is fooled by Russia, or sometimes both. Or sometimes it's the Russian propaganda, of course, which is so successful, as I indicated at the beginning. Victory in the fight against Russia is closer not only thanks to the series of military successes of the Ukrainian army, not only because the Russian bear is tired of sanctions, and sanctions packages are beginning to work more and more effectively, but also because of the large part of Western world has shown determination and tenacity. And in order to win the war against Russia, we must build completely new security architecture as well in the political and economic dimension. First, the economic reconstruction of Ukraine is a crucial condition for Europe's safety. Ukraine is our stronghold today, and investment in strengthening it is our duty in a moral sense and in terms of real hard politics. At the same time, reconstruction must mean transformation. We must be guided by the principle, build back better. Secondly, we must make sure that the offender pays for reconstruction. Russia should pay Ukraine war damages, war reparations. Too many times over the course of history we saw that the aggressors avoided consequences, avoided responsibility. And it was not mentioned today, so I'm going to emphasize that there is a huge pot of gold to be taken and dedicated for Ukraine's reconstruction, which is Russian assets of Russia Federation and Russian oligarchs. They are frozen in Switzerland and in many other countries all over Europe and the globe. But freezing means really not too much. Frozen assets can increase in value in several years or in 2 years' time. They have to be confiscated, and the money should be dedicated for reconstruction of Ukraine. Thirdly, we must vigorously carry on working on the process of Ukraine's integration in the EU. This is critically important. For peace has its price, so it's time to stop deluding ourselves that we will remain safe without investing in defense. Poland is dedicating 3 percentage points of our GDP on defense, and we are going to increase this amount of money even further. And six, it is time for, the fifth point is the time for a great reorientation of energy policy. That's probably for another conference, but I'm going to signal this as well. The truth is we have no choice. Either we make the effort that independence requires, or we will pay for freedom with blood. When it comes to military support, it is proportionately the second largest army. We allocated almost 1 percentage point of our GDP to support Ukraine financially, humanitarian help, and from the point of military support, weapon delivery. So let me conclude with some final remarks. The policy of appeasing Russia is bankrupt, and everyone who is still trying to enact it drags Europe down. There are no errors then that cannot be repaired. When I hear Madame von der Leyen say that our government, Poland, was right about Russia and Ukraine, I feel a sense of satisfaction. But I would forgo any sense of a feeling of satisfaction for the European impetus to act. This is critically important. Europe is much stronger than Russia, but the fact that it has not been able to stop Putin yet only proves that it is, to some extent, or it was, a paper tiger. We have to strengthen lots of our policies to really overwhelm the difficulties which we are confronted with. If we do not win the war with Russia, we risk more than just losing Ukraine and its security. We risk marginalizing the entire continent. The world only deals with strong players. Europe must prove its strength. It is our to be or not to be moment. Thank you very much.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. And let me very quickly, as time is moving on, welcome Matthias Cormann, Secretary General of the OECD. The OECD, a precursor of a founding institution of the Marshall Plan. So we're delighted with your legacy, sir. Mr. Cormann, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frau Präsidentin, Herr Bundeskanzler, Prime Ministers, Mr. President, distinguished guests, friends of Ukraine all. Our most immediate focus in support of Ukraine, rightly and necessarily, of course, remains on securing a just peace for Ukraine as soon as possible, on Ukraine's immediate financial needs and macro-financial stability, and indeed on keeping the lights on, keeping the heating going and the water flowing, keeping the other basic services going in Ukraine throughout this war, which we, of course, all continue to take for granted. But of course it is right that we must plan and prepare for recovery and reconstruction now, and importantly we must ensure we combine reconstruction efforts with the necessary reforms to help modernize Ukraine. We all want to help. We all want to support the emergence of a better, stronger, more modern Ukraine operating consistent with the high standards expected from a prospective member country of the European Union and the OECD. To achieve this, we will need a better coordinated and more coherent international approach with the EU, the G7, the IMF, the World Bank Group, the multilateral development banks and all relevant international organizations working together in a well-structured inclusive platform for policy and donor coordination. So I warmly welcome the calls of Chancellor Scholz and President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Šmihal to put the right, inclusive governance architecture in place to support the recovery, reconstruction and modernisation effort. We also need a clear division of labour, which reflects each partner's core strengths. At the OECD, we've been working in partnership with Ukraine since 1991, a partnership which was reinforced and further strengthened at two key occasions. First in 2014 and again following Russia's illegal invasion in February. At the OECD, we have stood and we continue to stand in strong solidarity with Ukraine, and we stand ready to do everything we can to help Ukraine rebuild better. Since the Lugano conference, we have formally welcomed Ukraine as a prospective member of the OECD. We have commenced an initial accession dialogue with the aim to lift Ukraine's adherence to OECD standards and participation in OECD bodies. Ukraine has also formally asked to join the OECD Working Group on Bribery in International Business Transactions and to accede to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. As a first step towards adherence to the Anti-Bribery Convention, we have commenced the process for Ukraine to join the working group as a participant for an initial 2-year period. We have previously contributed to the establishment of key anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine, including the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office and the High Anti-Corruption Court, and we will continue to build on that work together in close partnership with the government of Ukraine. We have established a dedicated OECD Ukraine liaison office to progress our work on supporting Ukraine's reform and modernization efforts, which we hope to physically open in Kiev as soon as possible. Over the summer, we supported the government of Ukraine in the preparation and review of its national recovery plan, and we are revising and aligning our joint OECD Ukraine action plan with the priorities set out in the government's recovery plan. We are working with the government on immediate support for educational continuity for displaced children and young people, while looking to the future with a project on redesigning Ukraine's education system. And we are also ready to support Ukraine on public governance policies to create level playing field conditions for domestic and foreign firms and investors in areas such as competition, state-owned enterprises reform, the energy sector and investment. We plan to undertake a formal OECD economic survey of Ukraine in order to help identify priority structural reforms for macroeconomic stabilisation, recovery and modernisation. And we are also continuing our long-standing work with Ukraine in support of Ukraine's decentralisation efforts. Pre-war surveys showed us that Ukrainians rated the work of the country's new local authorities positively, and they have proven resilient and very effective in wartime. And we are continuing to work intensively with Ukraine on tax reform as part of the base erosion and profit shifting, and in training Ukrainian judges on fiscal rulings. There is much to be done, as you can see. To optimise the outcomes, we need to do it all together in a well-coordinated and coherent way. We are looking forward to doing our bit, and Slava Ukraine.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you so much. And now by video, we finally welcome our last colleague. UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has put forward a video from Lugano to the London conference. This is the bookend of that, so we'll play that video now and warmly welcome Secretary Cleverly.
Chancellor Scholz, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. When Putin launched his onslaught against Ukraine in February, he arrogantly assumed that he would conquer his neighbour within a matter of days. But the people of Ukraine fought back with invincible courage, saving their capital from the invader and defeating Russian advances time and time again. President Zelensky stood up to be counted. Ukrainians stood up to be counted, and freedom-loving democracies around the world came to their aid. Putin's imperial ambition to conquer his neighbour amounts to the greatest possible violation of the international rules that protect every nation. If his aggression were to succeed, every expansionist tyrant would be emboldened to do their worst, and no country would be safe anywhere in the world. That's why we're all determined to stand up with Ukraine's people until they win, and I have not the slightest doubt that they will. Britain is Ukraine's second largest military donor after the United States, committing £2.3 billion this year, and we will provide the same again in 2023. We've committed £220 million in humanitarian assistance since February, and we've welcomed over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees into our country. We have also made £1.3 billion available to Ukraine by underwriting World Bank and EBRD lending, and providing £74 million of direct grants to Ukraine's government. But we all share a responsibility to help Ukraine's people rebuild their country after they achieve victory. We know the monumental scale of the task. Every day, the invader is reducing more of Ukraine to ruins, destroying schools, pulverizing hospitals, and wrecking countless homes. As winter approaches, Putin is obliterating power stations and depriving millions of Ukrainians of heat and light. We must use this conference to unite behind Ukraine's reconstruction and development plan, learning the lessons from previous reconstructions and using them to help rebuild Ukraine. And we must take forward that work at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London next year. International cooperation has helped Ukraine's heroes to turn the tide on the battlefield, and it will be equally essential to help Ukraine rebuild, so that when victory comes, Ukraine's people can thrive and prosper in the freedom that they have fought and died to preserve.
Secretary Cleverly, thank you very, very much for those important words. And of course, this conference is an extremely important stop as we began in Lugano and move to London next year. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand between your coffee break and a family photo, so I'm going to end this very quickly. But I think we've heard about hope, determination, victory, coordination, unity, strength, confidence. These are the words that will enable Ukraine to modernize and fully recover. With your warm applause, please thank our excellent panelists for their remarks. Oh,
thank you. Yes, thank you indeed. From left to right. Please remain seated for a second and follow instructions. Please, for a second, remain seated. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, President, Secretary General. Thank you, Heather, indeed. So before everyone gets moving, there's going to be a family photo now outside, only for the speakers of this conference. If you're not a speaker, please remain seated for just a second. And